all-systems Commonwealth was a federation of over 1 million member states spanning 6 galaxies at the height of its power, before the Long Night. Its military, the High Guard, would watch over the space lanes and keep the peace among the civilized worlds for over 12 centuries, a stunning feat unmatched by any in the history of the known universe since. The origins of the Commonwealth can be traced back to the race that founded it, the Tarn Vedrins. In 0 CY, Commonwealth year, the Tarn Vedrins founded the Vedran Empire, which came into being when a Vedran general named Huascar Naxioeri concluded his campaign of conquest across 6 galaxies, using the recently discovered slipstream allowing for faster-than-light travel. Afterwards, he would crown his mate, Yaweri I, as Empress. Over the centuries up until 4205 CY, the Vedrans would incorporate hundreds of thousands of worlds into their empire, either through peaceful diplomacy or the iron fist of the High Guard. But over time, imperial policies began to slowly give more power and representation to the member states under Vedran rule. But the biggest catalyst for reform came in 4205, when a race under the Vedran Empire, the Perseids, sparked an insurrection to rid themselves of the Empire. However, the full power of the High Guard was brought down on these belligerents, and their rebellion was inevitably crushed. But not after a long and protracted conflict that involved several High Guard squadrons defecting to the Perseids. The public outcry from the aftermath of the Perseid insurrection was immense, leading to the establishment of the Conclave, a group of democratically elected consultants within the Vedran government. The Conclave would continue to gain popular support until 4279 CY, when a Vedran spiritual guide named Suchartikul led the Conclave in voting to replace the Vedran Empire with an intergalactic republic. The Vedran Imperials, of course, drew a strong objection to this notion. Civil war was narrowly averted when a solution is brokered by High Guard Supreme Commander Sani Naxrafati. The Vedran Empress would retain her position as leader, but political power would be held by an elected government called the Triumvirate, 3 members who were elected into power to carry out the will of the government. However, legislative power would be held with the Conclave. As before, Conclave members would have to be elected into office by the people. With these new institutions, the old Vedran Empire had transformed itself into the system's Commonwealth, which would grow to become a shining beacon of civilization across the known worlds. The Commonwealth would continue to thrive well up into 7055 CY, when a Perseid mission initiates first contact with the new race that would become key players in the Commonwealth political and military landscape, humanity. 30 years after first contact, the humans would find themselves well suited to life in the Commonwealth, and soon became arguably the most prolific race in all 6 galaxies. By 8503 CY, the system's Commonwealth had entered a new golden age that future historians would deem the 12 centuries of peace, a time when the worlds of the Commonwealth were prosperous and its members lived in peace with either minimal or no conflict in their space. The 6 galaxies lived in such harmony that calls to disband the High Guard drew popular enough support to trigger a Commonwealth-wide referendum in 9688. Ending with a 52 to 48% vote rejecting the proposal. Fate, however, would soon remind the Commonwealth why a united military was essential in the intergalactic landscape. In 9766 CY, the human Nietzschean Perseid world of Brandenburg Tor was invaded by a savage and bloodthirsty race later known as the Magog. This new alien race would proceed to wipe out almost the entirety of the planet's population, consisting of 3 billion people. Fortunately for the Commonwealth, no other attack on their worlds by the Magog were as bloody as the massacre at Brandenburg Tor. 15 years of sporadic fighting later, Commonwealth diplomats were able to sign a non-aggression pact with the Magog, the Treaty of Antares. Unfortunately, not everyone was happy with the resumption of peace. The Nietzscheans, a sub-race of genetically modified humans, were outraged at the idea that the Commonwealth would strike a deal with such animalistic butchers. Instead of making peace with the Magog, they argued for an outright war of extermination. The Nietzscheans so strongly disagreed with the Treaty of Antares that 15 of their worlds threatened to secede from the Commonwealth. Only the assurances given by the High Guard leadership about guaranteeing the security of their worlds were able to get the Nietzscheans to stand down. But they will not forget or forgive what the Commonwealth allowed to happen. Before we get into the fall of the Commonwealth, it must be explained exactly why the Nietzscheans ignited the final war. as this was not just the defiant action of a race who were denied the outcome they wanted. The Nietzscheans were a people who took the words of German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche to heart, hence their name. Particularly Nietzsche's espousal of strife and conflict reshaping men into better and stronger versions of themselves. As such, the Nietzscheans are always striving to either improve themselves through hardship, genetic engineering, and even nanotechnology with the goal of becoming the ultimate survivor. Talk among the Nietzscheans about secession had always been a constant topic among them, as the proponents for secession pointed out that the Commonwealth had become a decadent, challenge-free environment for the Homo sapiens invictus. Such a race that prided itself on improvement through struggle could not stomach such an idea, since their own development would be hindered. However, the secessionists never had the support they needed until the Magog invasion. As the Nietzscheans were a people on the frontiers of the Commonwealth, they were subject to perhaps the worst atrocities inflicted by the Magog. Entire planets such as Dawkins Town, Hawking, and Kagame's world were invaded and turned into infested wastelands. Dissatisfaction with the Commonwealth grew among their people due to the perceived lack of aggressive action against the Magog. The Treaty of Antares proved to be the tipping point for the Nietzscheans. With the signing of this treaty, the Commonwealth had proven the secessionists right by showing how weak it had become by compromising to such barbaric savages. Not to mention the Treaty of Antares was seen as a grave insult to the horrific losses suffered by their people. At this point, the general consensus of the Nietzscheans was that the Commonwealth no longer deserved to exist, and had to be destroyed. Since the signing of the Treaty of Antares by 9784 CY, the Nietzscheans had amassed an armada of 10,000 ships strong to crush the High Guard in the system of Hephaestus. By using the rogue black hole in the system to block transmissions from getting out, the Nietzscheans would send out pleas for help via couriers to High Guard ships and ambush them before they could realize it was a deception, luring over 200 High Guard ships until the Andromeda Ascendant fell into the same trap as so many of her sisters did. Only a daring plan by her captain, Dylan Hunt, and the evacuation of the Andromeda's crew were the High Guard warned of the Nietzschean treachery. Forced into open warfare with the Commonwealth, the Nietzscheans launched into a massive offensive that saw them attacking over 500 worlds simultaneously. The end results being the destruction of almost half of the High Guard Argosy space fleet while they were stationed at their home port. This was followed by the orbital bombardment of Earth and the assassination of Commonwealth Empress Suchartikul XII by a Nietzschean strike force. The only victory for the High Guard during this Nietzschean offensive was the successful holding of the Than capital world of Sanskari. The reason for the Nietzschean effectiveness was simple. Despite the High Guard's overwhelming numbers in ships and personnel, they had not fought a prolonged conflict of any sort for centuries. The Magog invasion did little to instill the needed combat experience in the High Guard service people, as that conflict was mostly relegated to lower-scale border skirmishes. The Nietzscheans, with their philosophies emphasizing martial prowess and continual improvement in themselves, were simply a league above the typical High Guard rank and file. Ironically, a certain number of the few victories the Commonwealth achieved were credited to other Nietzscheans who remained loyal to them. By the second year in 9785, the High Guard continued to lose badly, a point that was punctuated by the Battle of Acheron Delta, where a High Guard counteroffensive was stopped cold by Nietzschean forces. But the most crushing loss to the Commonwealth was the sudden loss of Tarn Vedra from the Slipstream network. No one outside the Vedrans knew the why or how such an impossible act happened, but it mattered little. What was important was that the capital system for the Commonwealth was now effectively isolated from the other known worlds. The Than world of Sanskari would quickly be made to serve as a provisional capital, but by then the Nietzscheans had already all but taken the Andromeda and Milky Way galaxies. Defeat seemed inevitable. By early 9786, the Commonwealth as it was no longer existed. In a last-gasp attempt to destroy the Nietzschean alliance, the High Guard rallied the last of their ships for an attack on Fountainhead, the Nietzschean capital world. However, for the High Guard to surprise the Nietzscheans, they had to go through the Witch Head Nebula. But the Nietzscheans were ready for such a foolhardy attempt, and prepared an appropriately disproportionate response of 1,500 ships to meet the High Guard. But as they were waiting for the tattered remnants of the Commonwealth fleet, the space around them suddenly erupted into a seemingly endless line of explosions that eliminated 2/3 of the Nietzschean fleet and scattering their survivors across the nebula. By the time the High Guard arrived, the Nietzscheans were still reeling from their losses, Taking advantage of their disorganized state, the High Guard ships charged headfirst into the Nietzscheans. While the details of the battle are mixed, the end results were the near-complete destruction of the High Guard fleet, and the almost total destruction of the Nietzscheans. However, one lone ship from the High Guard managed to make it to Fountainhead, and proceeded to bombard the planet, rendering it uninhabitable before she was destroyed by the Nietzschean defenses. With one last-ditch battle, the Commonwealth had well and truly ended. Just 30 years ago, the 6 galaxies were united in peace for over 12 centuries. And in 3 short years, all of it was undone in the bloodiest civil war in intergalactic history. The next 300 years after the Battle of Witchhead would be referred to as the Long Night, as the weakened Nietzscheans descended into civil war and the political orders of the galaxy would reform themselves, often violently. Diseases long since eliminated had returned with a vengeance. The Magog, no longer bound by the High Guard, resumed their campaigns of pillaging and murder. Across the 6 galaxies, untold millions of sentients would die in the resulting power vacuum created by the fall of the Commonwealth. And yet, as the civilized worlds of the universe fell into chaos, a lone seed of hope rested in the same place where the Commonwealth Civil War began. The Andromeda Ascendant lay frozen in time near the rogue black hole of Hephaestus after their first battle with the Nietzscheans. In 300 years' time, she would awaken to this new universe, and under the leadership of Dylan Hunt, her captain, the dream of the Commonwealth would begin anew.